I just wanted to say that thank you all for coming. I'm Hubert Kozak of the library staff, and tonight's program is part of a series of programs that the library presents from time to time on topics related to the film industry. Sometimes we take a look behind the scenes at how films in a specific genre are made, or explore how a particular movie was made. We did this recently, for example, with Queens of Animation, and with a look at the making of the movie Chinatown, just a few weeks ago now. Tonight we're presenting a program on the craft and varied history of documentary filmmaking. In the spring, we hope to present a program on the creation of music scores for film by taking a close look at the storied career of Max Steiner, perhaps Hollywood's most influential composer. It has been noted that we are presently in a golden age of documentary filmmaking, with more documentaries being filmed, screened, and seen than ever before. But what impresses me more than that, I suppose, is that I've noticed that very often these days in advocacy and educational groups, a particular recent documentary comes up in the group conversation. People reference it, recommend it, and in particular talk about its defining impact on them. Documentaries are becoming more pervasive and an integral part of our conversations about political and social issues. In fact, they are often framing and shaping those conversations. Why this is happening is perhaps something our guests here tonight will talk about. Jon Wilkman's Screening Reality is a widescreen view of how American truth has been discovered, defined, projected, televised, and streamed during more than 100 years of dramatic changes, and it suggests some of the challenges ahead for documentary filmmaking at a time when our public discourse is fraught with tension and division. As I was reading Screening Reality and came to the final sentences of one of the chapters, I read some lines that felt to me like a cinematic transition, and it dawned on me that this book was being written by a documentary filmmaker. It occurred to me that maybe the best person to try to make a coherent narrative out of the history of documentary filmmaking was somebody who had spent a career making them. Certainly with over 100 years of documentary films, in telling this story, a lot of film had to be left, as they say, on the cutting room floor. But that seems something essential to the craft. Someone needed to be familiar enough with the subject to know the salient points and keep them in the story, and know how to find a narrative line, to identify the things that have changed, to note the innovation and the impact of new technologies, and to outline the issues and challenges about screening reality that have seemed perennial and endemic, that reflect the things we have always confronted in trying to explain to others what we have experienced as real and true. You can learn a lot in reading this book, not only about how documentaries were made, but also the very writing of it seems an exposition of documentary skills. I'm not sure the subject could have found a person better skilled and suited to tell this story than Jon Wilkman. Jon is an author and award-winning filmmaker whose work has appeared on ABC, CBS, PBS, HBO, and A&E. His 7-part series, Moguls and Movie Stars, A History of Hollywood, was nominated for 3 Emmys. His previous book, Floodpath, was an Amazon Nonfiction Book of the Year. He's a founding member and 3-term president of the International Documentary Film Association. Tonight we have as a special guest, talking with Jon about his book, Sonara Bartels. She's the chair of the documentary film department at the New York Film Academy here in Burbank. She's been involved in making documentary features and television and commercial projects. She has worked with as assistant director on a number of projects, including reality television shows for Discovery and National Geographic, and she currently teaches screenwriting and documentary writing and producing, and she continues to produce and direct. Please join me in welcoming Jon Wilkman and Sonara Bartels to the Burbank Public Library. Thank you.
Thank you, Hubert. Can you hear me okay? What inspired me to write Screening Reality was a concern about modern arguments about what some have called a post-truth era. I was convinced that insights into the evolution of nonfiction film, a craft I've spent my professional life pursuing, could offer important insights and cautions for the future. I take a long view of this subject. As you see on this screen, how the past and the future and the present can stand side by side. On the left is a kinetoscope, Edison's 1890 peep show box. You could listen to a phonograph record wearing 1890s earbuds. On the right is a virtual reality scene from a film called Hunger in Los Angeles. What's interesting is to see the Oculus Rift glasses worn by the woman on the right and the person on the left peering into the peep box. In some ways, we've come a very long way, in other ways, not much at all. Setting the stage for the invention of movies, the first photographs that moved were created in 1878 by an eccentric California photographer, Edward Muybridge. In the search for verifiable truth, Muybridge took sequential photographs of a running horse to prove that for a time all four hoofs were off the ground at the same time. When projected in rapid success, they produced an illusion of movement. So you really can argue that the first movie, or certainly proto-movie, from the beginning was a search for truth. Inventors in Europe inspired and informed Thomas Edison when he created the first practical motion picture machine system. In the 1890s, his associate W.K.L. Dixon shot movies in a shed called the Black Maria, the first movie studio. Ever the entrepreneur, Edison captured a lab worker's sneeze, which became the first copyrighted film. Again, it was a search for truth. What did the sneeze look like in a way that you could never see in real life, in real time? In France, in 1895, the brothers Auguste and Louis Lumière created a movie system that projected images on a theater screen, not inside a box like Edison's kinetoscope. Their first movies were proto-documentaries, scenes of everyday life and images of distant lands. They called them documentaires. When Edison premiered his version of projected movies in 1896, audiences were impressed, but many critics saw the inventor's Vitascope as just his latest toy. No one could really envision what you would do with this. Could you sit in a theater and watch scenes from street scenes of cities? Well, you could actually go to the city and walk around and hear things and see things. So movies was looked upon as maybe a kind of an interesting short-term fad. The earliest nonfiction films were called actualities. Enterprising cameramen like Billy Bitzer, who would make movie history with D.W. Griffith, clung to the front of a moving train and shot footage that took moviegoers on trips called phantom rides. That early film, you see it now almost every day. The phantom ride continues in watching some of the spectacular IMAX films. By 1915, movies were no longer considered a fad. They told compelling fictional narratives, but photographer Edward Curtis looked for ways to show the real world. Curtis's still photographs of Native Americans, considered at the time a vanishing race, led him to make a movie with the Kwakiutl people of British Columbia. His mix of fiction with fact was a box office failure, but suggested developments to come. Newsreels were early approaches to nonfiction filmmaking. During World War I, government-sponsored film reports played a role in informing the home front, but also stirred accusations of propaganda that shadowed debates about the role of documentaries in decades to come. The persuasive power of the movies was recognized early. During the first decades of the 20th century, when America received new generations of immigrants, educational filmmakers added Americanization to classroom curriculum. Films produced by unexpected movie maker Henry Ford taught lessons as they promoted his latest automobiles. Another idea which would continue with documentaries of mixing commerce and art, certainly in America. By 1922, American movies dominated the world, the products of the Hollywood dream factories. That year, a surprise hit starred an Inuit family of seal hunters in the Canadian Arctic. Robert Flaherty, seen here with his collaborative wife Frances, produced Nanook of the North, considered the first narrative documentary. Limited by the bulky silent camera equipment of the time and inspired by an idealized vision of reality, Flaherty admitted that sometimes it's necessary to lie to tell the truth. Husband and wife Martin Johnson, Osa and Martin Johnson, brought their African adventures to movie audiences in the 1920s and 30s. Osa, in particular, was an inspiration to a new generation of women who aspired for a freer life. In the dark days of the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt's administration applied government solutions to national problems. 31-year-old film critic Perry Lawrence was chosen as FDR's shooter. His films, The Plow That Broke the Plains and The River, were lyrical examinations of environmental conditions in the Great Plains, advocating for the New Deal solutions that conservative Republicans considered socialistic, if not worse. Truly socialistic, if not communistic, critiques of the injustices of the 1930s America came from radical photographers and filmmakers like Leo Hurwitz and Paul Strand. Their docudrama, Native Land, made accusations of racism and strong-arm union busting, but with theaters controlled by Hollywood studios, it was hard to get it shown beyond small venues with audiences that were already convinced. During the 30s and 40s, the most popular source of nonfiction filmmaking was the March of Time series. Although March of Time stories featured actors and reenactments and were far from politically radical, they had important influence on public attitudes toward the truth during a time of isolationism in the face of an emerging war in Europe, encouraging Americans to acknowledge the dangers ahead. When war came to the United States in 1941, many of Hollywood's greatest directors signed up to apply their fictional movie skills to making documentaries. Seen here, upper left, Frank Capra, below him, George Stevens, in the center, John Ford, and to his right, William Wyler, traded carefully structured scripts for stories which didn't follow standard plot lines. Throughout Screening Reality, I tell how nonfiction filmmakers and their films interacted with the world around them. During World War II, a long tradition of racial injustice needed to be confronted. The documentary, The Negro Soldier, was an attempt to include African Americans in the nation's military history, even if segregation remained in place. After victory, in the film Let There Be Light, Hollywood director John Huston addressed the reality of what combat can do to the human mind and spirit. Even as his film showed how therapy can help, his portrayal of the less heroic side of war led Let There Be Light to be banned for more than 20 years. With the rise of television in the late 40s and 50s, even if airtime was mostly consumed by easy-to-take entertainment, the power of documentaries was revealed by the video journalism of Edward R. Murrow and Fred Friendly. Their critical examination of the toxic influence of anti-communist Senator Joseph R. McCarthy contributed to his downfall. But it wasn't long before challenging long-form documentaries and cultural programs were headed toward extinction on advertised-driven American TV networks. During the tumultuous 1960s, new technology made a new approach to documentary film reality possible. Lighter cameras, more light-sensitive film stock, and easier recording of synchronous sound made cinema verite possible. Filmmakers like Bob Drew and Ricky Leacock, upper left. To the right, D.A. Pennebaker follows Bob Dylan. Below him, editor-co-director Charlotte Zwerin consults with Al Maisel standing and his brother David to his right. In the lower left, a young Fred Wiseman contemplates the next edit on his lengthy examinations of contemporary life. In 1973, American viewers were transfixed by the cinema verite captured lives of the Loud family. The 12-part series started as a sociological examination of the modern American family, then soon took on the trappings of a real-life soap opera, again suggesting things to come. Cinema verite brought a new attitude about what a documentary could and should be. Old attitudes that nonfiction films were meant to be good for you were challenged by films like Woodstock, directed by Michael Wadley, mixing entertainment with close-up looks at the counterculture in action. Making a documentary required equipment that could be expensive, and the cost of film processing and editing added a financial challenge to independent documentarians. That began to change with the advent of relatively inexpensive videotape systems. In the 1970s, a new movement called guerrilla TV launched with groups like Video Freaks and True Value Television, TVTV. They fought for airtime on television and succeeded, although their revolution was short-lived. Alternate points of view found more lasting success on public television as America became more diverse and multicultural. Henry Hampton Jr., upper left, produced Eyes on the Prize about the modern African-American civil rights movement. The documentary series Chicano did the same for Mexican Americans. Arthur Dong, lower left, brought Asian American stories to the wider U.S. historical narrative. To his right, the documentary The Times of Harvey Milk brought LGBTQ stories new respect and relevance. Even Native Americans found their voices on film. Women had been pioneers in the first decades of Hollywood history, but by the 1930s, when movies were big business, they were shunted aside. Documentaries provided a creative alternative where women filmmakers like two-time Oscar winner Barbara Koppel thrived. Her first film, Harlan County, USA, captured the power of organized labor, but also the beginning of the end for a labor movement that emerged in the 1930s. In the face of the influence of cinema verite, the historical documentaries of Ken Burns, arguably the best-known American documentarian, are proudly traditional, lengthy looks at the American experience, based on in-depth research, formal interviews, and thoughtful narration. During the 1980s and 90s, the television monopoly for serious documentaries owned by PBS programs like Frontline, founded by David Fanning and produced today by Rainey Arison Rath, pictured below, was challenged by the Discovery Channel founder John Hendricks, seen with former CBS anchor Walter Cronkite. But perhaps the greatest contribution to the new golden age came from edgy, emotional, and uninhibited films supervised by HBO's director of documentaries, Sheila Nevins. In a time when postmodernists claim that truth is a product of multiple perspectives, not objective reality, the films of Errol Morris, beginning with The Thin Blue Line, argued how truth is discovered is as important as what it is. But his films challenged preconceived notions and demanded that viewers question. In a politically divided environment, many prefer not to. Michael Moore's politically provocative films are forthright in the tradition of earlier activist documentaries, but he brought something new to his arguments, humor. His left-wing fans laughed. His opponents struck back with right-wing films funded by deep-pocket production money made possible by the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which declared that the expenditure of money for political purposes was an expression of freedom of speech. One of the most prolific documentarians today is Alex Gibney. His films, like Oscar-winning Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room, often based on in-depth print journalism. The appeal of documentary filmmaking draws a wider audience to investigate reporting that has become vital to truth-challenged times. The days when theaters dominated distribution was eclipsed by broadcast television, and then the choice of cable, and more recently the streaming options of services like Netflix that use documentaries to expand the growth, influence, and impact. Series like Making a Murderer span decades with the entertainment appeal of crime mysteries and courtroom fiction. The history of another nonfiction trend explored in Screening Reality is the personalization of filmmaking, made possible by inexpensive and easy-to-use equipment that made available online distribution alternatives. As early as the 1920s, Americans produced their own home movies, And starting in the 1980s, trained documentarians like Ross McElwee made their lives the subject of films like Sherman's March. Today, everyone has a cell phone and can record and distribute a video. With filmmaking experience easy to acquire, audiences can become more sophisticated consumers of screen reality or make truth even more insulated and personal. Turning everyday people into TV stars can be traced to the cinema verite adventures of the Louds and the American family. Today, producer Mark Burnett is the king of the documentary-style mutant called reality TV. Even if viewers know what they are watching isn't always on the up and up, many don't care, preferring to be entertained by truths they prefer to believe. The Apprentice, one of the most successful reality TV shows, crossed the line from credibility-appearing artifice to the real world when Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. Some documentaries demand viewers confront hard realities. Others are about engaging experiences. The first Peep Show films were viewed as carnival attractions, glimpses of the unusual. With big screen projections, they could be spectacles like a train arriving head-on into a station. In an attempt to counter the appeal of television, Hollywood movie makers developed large-screen Cinerama in 3D. A modern IMAX camera is a common way to make watching a documentary as an immersive experience. So what about the future? IMAX could be soon passé if the development of virtual reality achieves its promise to conjure environments that are truly immersive in interaction. The experience becomes one of story finding, not storytelling. Again, documentaries will be challenged by technology. Maintaining a commitment to evidential truth will be more difficult than ever and never more essential. That's it. Thank you very much, and I look to talking with Sonora and answering your questions.
So I have to say that hi, John. So I have to say that Jon's book is expansive. Yes, I read it all. I read every 446 pages, and it's an amazing breadth of knowledge and an amazing dip into this. You know, it's funny, I'm glad that you did this slideshow so that the audience has some context. John, you'll have to have I guess, for me? Got it. Okay, got it. I'm glad you put up the slideshow to give people context because initially I actually had a sort of conservative approach to the book because I thought to myself, how does someone do a history of documentary without including international influences? Like I was like, how does that work? And then I began, as I read the book, I began to really lean into it. And the moment I leaned into it was the moment he got to Osa and Martin Johnson. And the reason was because I remembered that as a child, my mother in the 60s was 30 years old, mother of 6 children, a housewife, and she decided to go back to school and become a working mother. And years later, I said to her, how did you have the courage to do what you did at the time? And she said, Osa Johnson's books.
I Married Adventure was her big bestseller.
Right. And so this woman who had been a documentary filmmaker with her husband then went on to write books about it, which I thought was great. How do you think those two, of course, first, you know, Robert Flaherty came first, but you talked a little bit about that. How did they open up the world for Americans, if we're influencing Americans?
Well, they're a complicated and an interesting couple, particularly as far as women are concerned. Osa, in the 1920s, women had an opportunity to be liberated. They got the vote and could work outside the house, or at least they potentially could. And Osa Johnson was this idol for so many women. I tell a story about, in one of their films, there's a scene in which there's a lion coming to attack Martin and Osa, and she brings out her rifle, shoots the lion dead, and the next scene she's back in camp baking an apple pie.
I can bring home the bacon.
But that was satisfying to women because, if it was only shooting lions, they could never relate. With the apple pie, they could relate. Sadly, however, by the way, Osa and Martin crashed in an airplane right near here, killing Martin. She survived. They were trying to land in Burbank Airport. But as I talk about in the book, and there's more than one occasion of this, is that often films, every film, you can't tell everything. There's often a whole nother film behind what you show, around what you show. In the case of Osa Johnson, as inspiring as she was, from about 1920 on, she was a serious alcoholic. She really couldn't take the pressure, but no one ever knew that. As I say in the book, it would have ruined the story. And so that and Robert Flaherty's story, which if you want to get to, I'll get into it. But that is really part of what makes documentaries exciting, is that there's always another level you can go. You can always widen the frame if you want.
So the question I had about Robert Flaherty and Nanook of the North, and I'm gonna sort of leap, I'm gonna go back in time and leap forward in time a little bit. Nanook of the North is discussed as the first commercially successful documentary. It was huge. They wanted him to go out and make another one. They were like, here's some money, please go out and make another one. I was like, wow, is that me? Okay. Now, what's interesting about Nanook of the North, which, of course, Jon, you discuss in your book, that there were certain liberties taken when he's shooting Nanook, and there's a moment where Nanook bites a record, and as though he doesn't know what a record is. And there was a historian or an anthropologist at the time who said, no, he would have known what that was, so I'm not quite believing everything Robert's showing us. Cut forward several years, and Bowling for Columbine comes out, and it's one of the most popular documentaries of its time, highest money maker of its time. It also did not fully portray the truth and did things that were in that moment made up, and it also had statistics that were made up. So I'm wondering, what's your take on creative license and truth?
Well, Michael Moore, and I will not remember the quote properly, but Roger Ebert had a wonderful quote about Michael Moore. He says, some in this film is true. I'll get it wrong, but what people forget about Michael Moore is he's a satirist. He's not a journalist. And he makes jokes. And this famous story, because another thing, when talking about Flaherty, there's always people, from today's perspective, they say, oh, well, first of all, Flaherty was doing a historical film. He wanted to show the Inuit as they were before the white man. So of course, they knew about gramophones, and of course, they had rifles. But that's not the film you wanted to make. The other thing is we're all spoiled today with the equipment we have, particularly younger filmmakers. If he was going to take a picture of something, he had a camera about this big, a huge tripod. You didn't go chasing after Nanook on the ice fields with a boom mic over your head. It was shot silent. You had to set up everything. You had to stage it. So what it comes down to is, and I talk about this throughout the book, is what's the intent of the filmmaker? And is the intent to deceive you? Is the intent to entertain you? Is the intent, in the case of someone like Michael Moore, is the intent to catch your interest catch with humor? So the story that's told in Bowling for Columbine is a very famous scene in which he goes to a bank, and at the bank, if you deposit $500, they give you a gun. So you see him go in there, and he hands the $500 to the woman. In the next shot, he's outside the bank waving a rifle. Well, his critics from the political left said, and the bank started, this is totally false, it's totally untrue, he's lying. You know, the film was made called Michael Moore Hates America. He's the biggest liar, you can't trust a word he says. Well, in fact, it was a lie. You have to wait a day to get your rifle.
That's a lie, and that's a lie.
That's a lie. However, the bank is giving away guns.
Right, the truth of it was that they gave you a certificate that you took to a sporting goods store.
They had guns in the bank.
That they took to a sporting goods store, and you actually still had to go through a check. You had to go through a 2-week check. Documentary then evolved really rapidly from Nanook, then it evolved rapidly through the social issue documentaries of the 30s and into World War II. I found the World War II documentaries really interesting, and often the nonfiction films that they made, except that last one, of course, that got banned for 20 years, right?
It was too true.
It was too true, right? But for the most part, they supported the war and sort of drummed up support for the war. And so my question is, in your mind, what's the line between documentary and propaganda? And is that line drawn by the filmmaker, or is it drawn by the distributor?
It's actually drawn by the audience. One of the points of this film is that the filmmaker can have all kinds of, efforts to tell the truth. If the audience doesn't believe it chooses not to believe it. Or the filmmaker tells a total falsehood and the audience loves it and believes it. So it's this exchange between the two. In World War II, Hollywood got involved all through the history of documentaries. The movies are an entertainment industry primarily. Documentaries are kind of a separate realm. They always sort of blur. So even Nanook, it was meant to be funny when Nanook is biting the gramophone, and you want to be entertained. And so the modern generation of filmmakers, basically the old style or the original style, the take was that the documentaries are the D word. A documentary is good for you. It entertains you. It educates you. And if you get entertained, yeah, but primarily it's there. And all from the very beginning, filmmakers who are making films in the context of the Hollywood entertainment business or just in movie making in general, chafed at this. And whatever they could, they pushed the boundaries. Not just lying, but they wanted the film to be more dramatic. So they developed narrative arcs. So one of the famous films that from the Maisels did is called Gimme Shelter. And it's a film about a concert, but during which a man is killed. And the editor, Charlotte Swerin, she wanted to tell a dramatic story. So she withheld information as you would do in a mystery story. She used slow motion, freeze frame, and all this kind of stuff, which the cinema verite purists hated. She called them the cinema verite police. So what I say in the book, and repeatedly, is the difference between a fiction film and a nonfiction film is that in a fiction film about a murder, in a nonfiction film about a murder, it's certain that the victim is permanently unavailable for a second take. And people say, oh, you can fudge it, you can reenact it. There is a difference, and there's the postmodern, which is the big hip thing that Errol Morse gets involved with in a good way. That's all, it's all just lies. The whole movie business is lies. You do a documentary, so what happened after you turn the camera off? What happened before you turn the camera on? What happened? What's outside the frame? You're just lying. The whole thing's a lie. Don't trust me. Or as our president said, don't trust any of that. Just trust what I tell you. So to me, I think that's crap. But people pick away at documentaries and forget that really what you're after is the intent. Because what happens with a documentary filmmaker versus a fiction filmmaker can have a bomb and make another one. Can do another Marvel sequel and make another one. A documentary filmmaker has a very special relationship with the audience, and it's a relationship built on trust. When you say, I'm making a documentary, the audience says, okay, you're telling me this is not, the latest Marvel. This is your best effort to tell me what you found and show me what you found. And I will trust you. I'll trust you, and I won't trust the fiction filmmaker who's basically out to make money and entertain me. You're trying to tell me about the real world. Well, for some ways you fail to do that as a documentary filmmaker, you lose trust. And when you lose trust, you lose everything. Without trust, there is no documentary films. There are no documentary filmmakers. So ethical issues are constant in making documentaries. And one of my earliest experiences, I'm blabbing on, I'll just tell you this real quick. One of my earliest lessons when I was a youngster, and I was doing a documentary for a series of short documentaries, and it was a story about a man who in his neighborhood in the Bronx, there was a days when the Bronx was just like a war zone. And he and his neighbors, he gathered his neighbors together and they fixed up a park. And they planted plants, and it was just beautiful. So I did the whole film about what they did. And then at the end of it, I interviewed him. And he's talking to me, and as he's talking to me, suddenly tears start pouring down his face. And as the young documentarian I was in those days, I said, gold, what a hell of an ending for this film. It's going to be terrific. We'll end with the tears coming down, we'll fade to black. It'll be fabulous. And he then afterward, he came to me and apologized and said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cry. And I said, no, you were proud of what you did. And he said, no, well, actually, my dog had died yesterday, and I emotionally have not gotten over it. So a wise old editor that I work with, that I actually just talked on the phone with today, who's 94 years old. And his first question to me was, okay, is he crying about the park or the dog? I didn't know. I thought probably it was the dog. But I said, well, it's going to be a hell of an ending. And he says, you're the director, whatever you want to do. And I left it out. And I said, listen, I can't live with the idea that knowingly, if I never knew about the dog, that's one thing. I knew about the dog. And so anyway, those are the ethical questions that are just critical to documentary filmmaking.
I love that. I kind of hate that he left it out as a storyteller, but I also kind of love that he left it out. It's like, go ethics! So obviously, the evolution of documentary filmmaking has had to do, I loved all the innovations. I love that you put the peep show up with the virtual reality because they don't appear in the same place in the book, and I hadn't put them side by side, and that's so genius. But obviously there's many innovations, including the pancake film camera during the war and the Portapak that you showed. So that's led to sort of an evolution and an ease to make documentaries. But what do you think has led to the recent uptick in the popularity of documentaries?
Part of it's economics. There are more outlets to make films for, and documentaries are cheap to make. And the influence of reality TV is huge. And what I talk about in the book is that, again, going back to this idea of trust, is, people say to me, oh, everyone knows reality TV is phony, no one believes what's going on there, but the argument is, oh, it's unscripted. Thus, it must be a little bit more true, because it doesn't have a script than a scripted film, which is made up. But mainly, the audience, again, is the key to it. The audience decides, I don't care. There's a wonderful quote that I use in the book from P.T. Barnum. He says that basically he learned that audiences prefer to be amused even when they know they're being deceived. And that's the key to what's going on right now in politics. And it's certainly, again, a struggle that you have when you make documentary films.
I think that that's interesting. I just know that there's actually a statistic right now. I was talking to somebody at Netflix, and they said from 2015, in 2015, maybe 30% of the people were watching documentaries, maybe. By 2018, that number had changed to 70% of the people, of the audience. So there is this gain right now and in popularity in audiences, not just in the people that, oh, they become popular to make, yes, but also I think you're right, there's the audience seeking a truth, right?
Well, they're also being made in a style which is fiction. You know, all these murder mystery series that go on forever, I mean, it's a narrative style of fiction. It's a real murder, and they're real people, and they're going to go to jail, and they're in a real courtroom, but the story is told as a fiction story. It has the arc of a fiction story. And that suddenly broke through to audiences. Rather than having Edward R. Murrow tell you that Joseph R. McCarthy is a bad person, and putting together evidence to show that in a kind of a journalistic way, you can watch these movies as if you're watching a fiction film. And it's fun from a point of view, and I talk about this in the book as well, is if you've made films, you know when filmmakers are fooling around. You know what they're doing. There was a big successful film called Catfish. It's as phony as a $2 bill. And you could see right away what they're doing. The secret is this: if you're in a car and the phone rings and someone picks up the phone and says, "Oh, wow, we just learned that so-and-so is happening. Wow, we should go there right away." The chances that the phone rang at that time with the camera running are zero. You're faking the phone call. Now, it may have actually happened and the camera wasn't running. That's different. But if that is the case, you have to find a way. I don't know exactly how to do it, but you need to find a way to inform the viewers that and it can be very subtle, that you're not getting the up and up. And particularly, if there never was a phone call, then that's a total lie. And it happens a lot in that film. They knew all about this woman well before they're so surprised. Oh my God, look at this woman. She's doing this crazy thing. They knew about it weeks ago. They knew all about it. And they're faking the story because it's better from a narrative drama point of view. So you start fooling around with chronology. You start fooling around with omissions because, like the story of the guy with the park, is that, well, if I'd have known it, I could have said, okay, we'll still use the tears. I just won't tell anybody about the dog. And ultimately, you can't do that if you're a serious filmmaker.
I think there's also a sense in all documentarians, or certainly young documentarians coming up, that it's sort of a guerrilla type profession. We can team up and we can create something without a lot of people. But as you and I discussed before the evening started, that writing is still key, story is still key. So talk to me about how story is evolving or devolving, how documentary storytelling is evolving or devolving. You talked a little bit about it just now with the fiction, but how else can we respond?
Well, you look at the work of probably the most popular American documentarian, Ken Burns, and his scripts are wonderful. Jeffrey Ward is a fabulous writer. Writing narration scripts is out of fashion and has been for some time. So I was saying, watching a very good film, Factory, which is a very good film, but they're just struggling not to have a script. So they're putting in title cards. They're doing everything they can to avoid writing a script. And they're struggling to get away from formal interviews. These are the legacy of cinema verite. And those are, cinema verite is no more real than any other form of filmmaking. In many ways, it's Fred Wiseman, who is probably my favorite documentarian. He says that much of what he finds when he's shooting is coincidental, but nothing you see in the film is coincidental. He's structuring a story. He's not lying to you. He's not fooling around with the chronology. He's not doing omissions. But he's also not doing a dramatic arc of a multi-series where there's the mystery. And so you get into situations like, and I talk about this, the Jinx, the movie which is now being done. In the 60s, CBS did a documentary called The Uncounted Enemy, which was about Vietnam, and that the General Westmoreland had been fooling around with the numbers of Viet Cong who had died to make it look like we were winning the war. And so there's evidence of that. And so this documentary came out and said that he was fudging the numbers. Well, he sued for $120 million. And eventually, the problem was that when they did that, the editor of the film, and this sound, to a young filmmaker sounds like so silly. Why were you excited about this? They did 3 or 4 questions around the same subject. Then they combined answers to different questions in this thing. And you can say, it's the same subject. But in real actual terms, he wasn't answering that question. Even as close to what he did, he's not answering it. So that led to the suit. Eventually it was dropped. So now you move ahead to reality TV. It's common. In fact, the term in reality TV is called the Frankenbite. Bites being short excerpts of audio that you use to construct an interview. Frankenbites are you take a sentence or a paragraph and you flip the words around and you put this in here and you add this to make it better. So in Jinx, the famous scene is that Durst goes to the bathroom and they leave the microphone on, and in the bathroom he appears to confess to these murders. And he's, what did I do? Killed them all. That's what I did. And 2 things. They claim that they only discovered this tape or this material very close to the HBO premiere. People are saying they knew about this for 2 years, and they wanted to time it with the premiere. Now, you can argue one way or the other. I'm not claiming that either is true. The other thing is they had created a Frankenbite. They moved the sentence around, so the last thing he says is, kill them all, that's what I did. Much more dramatic. He did say all that.
He did say it.
He did say all that.
You're right.
But so you say, okay, listen, you have to make some kind of compromises. I won't attack it. But the defense wants to throw that interview out as being false. It's going to stay. But all of a sudden, you're making a cooler, more dramatic statement. Next thing you know, you may be getting a man off on a murder charge because you didn't pay attention to what you're doing.
Well, and not only that, but they possibly obstructed justice for 2 years by sitting on it. One of the things, John, you and I have both been on a set. Many of you have probably been on a documentary set. If you're a sound person, you've got your cans on, or you've got them around your neck. Even if you've stopped filming, you have your, we call them cans, sorry, headphones. You've got them around your neck. If somebody started talking in the restroom, started murmuring, if my guy started murmuring, I'd be like, what the heck's he saying, right? Wouldn't you be doing that on that day?
Or they heard him babbling to himself all the time. And they said, let's just keep the mic running. Let's just keep the audio running. Let's see what he says this time.
Yeah.
So you don't know.
There's still an awareness.
But it's, I don't want to put them down too much, but again, it goes back to this idea of trust, which is so critical. And sure, you can be as creative as you want. You can use, I've made films with Monty Python animation in them. I've done docudramas. In the 80s, I was doing the Richard Speck murder case in Chicago, and shot it in black and white. And I actually used the transcripts of the trial for the script. So you have all kinds of freedom in your creative freedom. But the main thing is, you never sacrifice, whatever style you use, you never sacrifice that critical element of trust. And it's hard to convince, because people, younger filmmakers chafe at that. It's so much cooler if I do this, and yeah, it is cooler, I admit, and maybe you could do it. But you've got to find a way when you do it that the audience knows you haven't fooled them.
Well, and I guess I want to have one last question. Hubert, sorry, had my guy over there checking me out.
We're not going to go on for another hour?
So I kind of want to do a spoiler alert with one of your final quotes of the book. Is that okay? Because it's such a great quote, and when you get to it, you kind of go, mind blown. I'm just going to read an excerpt from it, where you say films...
Rearrange the words to make
Yeah, right. I'm going to
make it
rearrange
better.
the words and do an excerpt for you, just as an example of what we're talking about. Okay, so he says, films that honestly involve other human beings in the real world are crucial to maintaining a society that is inclusive and free. I love that. That brings me back to the Times Magazine cover that you reference in your preface or in your introduction, I can't remember. And that cover is Truth Dead? What do you think, John? Like, I'm dying to know. Is truth dead?
You don't make documentaries and not be an optimist. I'm an optimist. But I think we are, and I'm not the only person who believes this, we are in really critical times. Really critical times. American democracy is really hanging by a thread in many areas. And it's going to be this combination of, in the case of documentaries, documentary filmmakers and audiences. And we all, I talked briefly at the end, what's going to happen technologically? I mean, the days of Nanook and the bulky cameras and the light cameras and the video, what's going to happen next is, you've probably all heard what's called deep fakes. You can take a piece of video and swap somebody's head
Very
easily. And, or, there's a famous story that there's a speech that Obama gave when he was president, and he's delivering the speech, and he's talking, and you see him talking. The words coming out of his mouth were words of a speech he gave at Harvard 20 years before. You can, if you look closer, you could figure it out, but soon you won't be able to figure it out. So, the demands of audiences right now is that they have to start demanding from what they watch and what they believe. And documentary filmmakers have to work with them and not make it easier for them to escape into lies or escape into fantasy or escape into something else. Because if you lose that credibility, that trust, we're gone. We're gone. And particularly in a democracy where you really need an educated electorate who makes wise decisions, hopefully, about what they want to do. And when they make mistakes, they correct them. And documentary filmmakers, the underlying theme of the book, documentary filmmakers are critical and pivotal to our country historically from 1890, but even more so right now.
So Hubert's going to come get my microphone, and we're going to open up questions to the audience, or his microphone. That one? This one? And then you're going to take that one. This is actually a better mic, so there you go.
I'm sure you have some questions. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Let me get over there so we can get it on the film.
I just want to know, what do you think in terms of filmmaker? Does it think about the subject first, or does the subject come to the filmmaker? And I'm thinking like Paris is Burning and The Band Played On, which were about marginalized communities, and they were huge hits, but when they were making it, I don't think they expected that kind of reaction.
Yeah, it's a great film. And you brought up, to my embarrassment, a film I didn't include in the book consciously. Not because I didn't like it. In fact, I liked it a lot. And argued for IDA to give it an award. And Jenny Livingston, who made the film, I remember saying to her, I said, because they had all this music. And I said, God, the music rights are going to kill you. And she said, music rights? But what I tried to do, the films and filmmakers I choose are basically those who are, again, this is not a put down, they're not the one-hit wonders of pop music. They have a career. They make films again and again. People like Barbara Koppel and Alex Gibney and Michael Moore and Errol Morris and the Measles, all those folks. They've spent their life making films. But when you make a film, I did a film called Chicano Rock, The Sounds of East LA. And you probably guessed, I'm not Chicano. And I saw that this was an untold story. So I met people who had written a book about it, and they'd written a wonderful book called Land of a Thousand Dances. And I got together with them. And it took 10 years to make the film. But I knew the idea was good. The problem was the East Coast is where the money is. That's where PBS is. They were saying, Mexicans, well, who's going to care about them? I mean, it's California. You'll have some screenings in LA, it'll be good, maybe Texas, but no one's going to watch this around the world, around the country. So I finally convinced them. I said, where do you think the second largest Mexican-American population is after Los Angeles, number one? They said, oh, Houston, Dallas, whatever. And I said, no, Chicago. And suddenly they said, hey, maybe there's something to this after all. But anyway, that's a long story of saying. But that story, I sensed that was a great story.
I think we choose stories as opposed to, I'm sorry, but I teach this all the time, that sometimes you think you've got a great topic for a documentary, but in fact, what you should be looking at or for is what's the story there? Who are the people involved? Paris is Burning is a beautiful film because of the characters, right? Because of the people involved, and they take our heart. I talked to Ramel Ross, who came out with Hale County Morning and Evening a couple years back, and I talked to him at the IDA Awards. And the thing he talks about, and I think that more and more documentary filmmakers are talking about, is we are coming into an era of radically personal stories, right? That we are trying to share us as people so that it's not just about education, but it is, and an educated voter thing, right? But it's not just about that. It's that, who am I, who are you, how are we the same, how are our communities the same, how can we, I am you, you are me, we are all together.
Yeah, I taught at USC for a while, and every time I would ask people to come up with an idea for a film, and they would say, well, I'm interested in, pet chihuahuas, and I want to do a documentary about pet chihuahuas. Or my grandmother is a very interesting woman, and I want to do a documentary with my grandmother. And I was probably not popular with the students. I said, I want you to do a documentary about someone you don't know. It's not you, it's somebody else you don't know. It's not your grandma, somebody else's grandma. Because so often today, we talk about this, is that with all these cell phone cameras, archivists, and I talk about this in the film, when the 8mm cameras were around, and you would get these shots of Disneyland in the 50s, it was incredible. You look today, what are you going to get shots of? It's your face and the face of your friends. You don't see Disneyland. You see your face and the face of your friends. And with all this power of technology, how do you get people to turn the camera the other way? Look at worlds that you don't know, people you don't know, explore them, come to understand them, and come to share them. So it's really important. I mean, the tendency really today is it fragments the world. That you say, in the case of, say, like Nanook, what Florida wanted to do, he wanted to talk about these Inuit people. These are people who hunted seals and ate blubber with their hands. And he wanted to show them. Or one of my favorite filmmakers, a guy named Les Blank. And Les Blank's philosophy was, how do I make a film? Well, I go down, I get drunk with the guys, and I make a movie. And he would hang out with them. And because he wanted to capture who they were. It's not about him. And it's hard, I think, with a lot of the younger filmmakers, they want to make it about them. Here's my world. I'm here in my world. I'm going around. I'm seeing my friends, and I'm doing this. I don't want you. I want you to do that film, and it may be a great film. But in the case of Jenny Livingston's film, that wasn't her world. She found a world that she didn't know about, and people she didn't know about, and found stories that weren't directly connected to her. And that, to me, that's, I think, important.
And they did that also in Skate USA, or United Skates, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned Les Blank. He's a genius. But also, I just wanted to point out, anyone here, most of the movies you mentioned are on Criterion, so there's an easy way to find them. Paris is Burning just came out. Wonderful movie. Also, so I wanted to ask you, what is the documentary that inspired you to make documentaries? Was there a specific movie that just set you off on your path?
I knew I was going to get asked this question, and I'm going to sort of mildly cop out. but it's connected. I was watching, when I was a young individual, there was a TV series called Omnibus. And they did a documentary about the violinist Jascha Heifetz. And you got to know him, you saw him. And at one point, he was playing a piece of music that's incredibly fast, and he was technically really amazing. And they showed his fingers in slow motion. And you saw him making these enormous leaps back and forth across the keyboard. And I said to him, I've never seen something like that before. I now understand more about why he's a great violinist by having seen that. So it really isn't a true documentary, but basically, what I always say to people when they ask, why do you make documentaries? It's very simple. When I make a documentary, I go out, I find a story, or a story finds me, I go shoot it, and I go find something, and I go look at something, and I go, wow. And I shoot it, make the film, show it to somebody else, and they go, wow. It's that exchange. It's that sharing. They're wowing what you wowed over. And so many of the documentaries, it's unfair, there's hundreds of them, but Titicut Follies is a early Fred Wiseman film. Also, a very similar film, Let There Be Light, which is the John Huston film, very moving film. And they're just endless. What I often have, for my own taste, is I'm concerned in many cases, again, where affection for eccentricity becomes voyeurism. And a lot of young people say, God, look at that weird guy, he's so weird, he acts weird, that's cool, you've never seen anybody dress like that or act like that. Are you really feeling affection for this guy? Or are you basically using him as a source of entertainment, of voyeurism? And a lot of documentaries are voyeuristic. Cool, I'm in this world with these people. You want to, if not love these people, you want to respect them, and you want to care about them. And as Susan Raymond, who was the sound person on An American Family, said to young people, she said, everyone was excited about American Family because it was a huge hit. It was drama, there was drinking and divorce, and Lance Loud was gay, and it was just great. But Susan Raymond said, and I quote her in the book, she said to younger filmmakers, she said, you have to realize when you make a film, you're showing somebody in that film to the rest of the world, and you better have that right. You're going to go on and make another film. They're going to live with that image that you created of them. And you better be careful about what you're doing.
Hi, I just wanted to know what made you want to pursue documentary filmmaking over, say, like movie?
Well, that's a movie, not the real thing. Well, why didn't I do the real thing? It's very simple. It's the word that drove John Hendricks, the founder of Discovery Channel, and it's the word that drives every documentary filmmaker. It's a simple word, it's curiosity. And I was curious, and I wanted to find answers, and I wanted to share those answers. I wanted to share experiences that I had, and join, as Les Blank did. He wanted to make connections with people that I wouldn't meet, I wouldn't see, and that kind of stuff. And although I love fiction films, and I did a whole series for Turner Classic Movies on the history of fiction films called Moguls and Movie Stars. But basically for me, I liked the idea that what I was exploring and what I was showing was real. And that to me was really appealing. Also, the difference between being entertaining, which is what fiction filmmakers are basically about. Even, they're great art, obviously, too. The best films are, but ultimately it's about entertaining. Documentary filmmakers are engaging you in the world. To me, that is interesting. So I never really considered working in so-called fiction films. I've taught it. And I take it back, I did write some scripts in New York, but they were all based on actual historical events.
Sorry. So this pretty much goes along with what you were talking about earlier about the youth and as you as well. With social media vastly expanding, and it almost seems like this world is becoming more and more divided. You said that you see that the whole vlog style of it's my world and I want to show it instead of finding that world. Do you feel like maybe in order to show the vulnerability of the person, the individual, maybe that might show the truth, and then you really do engage with more of the world, and maybe, yeah.
No, I didn't want to put down personal film. Ross McElwee, if you don't know about Ross McElwee, you should see his films. And Sherman's March is his most famous one. And he walks around with a camera on his shoulder and talks with people. And they talk to him. And some of them say, get that camera off your shoulder. You know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Now I have another question. How, if you have people, more and more people doing that then, and since camera equipment is becoming more affordable and available, anybody can pretty much create some construct that's completely false. How does one person stand out and actually be seen as a truthful documentarian?
It's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, I think that one of the again, going back to the personal film, which was popular in the 80s, the guy Ed Pincus did a film called Diaries about his own life. And because the equipment was so portable and you could go around this is where fiction sort of applies. Is what you're showing me interesting? If it's you sleeping and hanging out with your friends in the kitchen cooking, you know, unless you're cooking interesting stuff, is this interesting? It's interesting to you, maybe interesting to your friends. Is it interesting to a million people? What people have found out, which is, and I talk about this in the film, is the tradition of home movies. And that essentially home movies were people who could take movies that other people wouldn't, you know, stories and situations that would. So the classic example is the 1939 World's Fair, which is a huge fair, and a guy came around with his family, like everybody else, had an 8mm camera and shot all this stuff. And most of it was very similar to the commercial films that were being used to advertise the fair. But he went on the midway in the back of the fair where all these scantily clad ladies were dancing. They weren't in the promotional films. So his personal interest in that way added a whole dimension to understanding what the fair was all about. So, again, I talk another classic example. It's a wedding that's taking place in Amsterdam. And the guy's up in the window, he's taking pictures of the bride and groom, and they're coming out of the street. And for a moment he cuts away, and there's a young girl leaning on the sill of the window, looking out into the street. And it's Anne Frank. Total accidental. Or the most famous home movie, Abraham Zapruder's footage of Kennedy being killed. So I had a boss at CBS who would always say to me, writing, and I say this to filmmakers too, which is, why are you telling me this? The answer can't be it's cool. There's more to it than that. Or these are weird people, and you know I want to show weird people. What else? What's the next layer? So it could be your life story. It could all be. It could be skateboarding. It could be surfing movies. There are wonderful early surfing movies of people who are passionate for surfing. But that's the question. Why, out of all the minutes and seconds in my life, should I give some of those to you? And you may have a good answer, and it can be anything you want. But you need to think as a filmmaker that way. I think it's worth taking 5 minutes of your finite life to look what I want to show you, and you'll benefit from what I'm going to show you.
I think you referred to this briefly in your introduction. If someone sponsors you to do a film like the military and you know it's going to be used for recruiting purposes, are we still talking about a documentary?
Yeah, what a lot of people don't know, and if you're an independent filmmaker, like me, or someone very famous like Alan David Maysles, 20% of documentarians make a living at it. So you make what's called sponsored films. You make films for foundations. I've done films for Save the Children about issues of children, particularly in war zones. I was paid for it. I had no problem showing that the work of Save the Children is good. The Maysles made films for Alpo dog food and all kinds of stuff like that. So yeah, you have to do that, but you turn stuff down too.
They have things now called branded content, right? Where they have these little micro docs or 5-minute documentaries, and at the end of it, you'll see the word Yeti, framing the shot, because it's really a Yeti cooler commercial that you've just watched. But what they're also showing you is a lifestyle that's true. They're showing you something, a little mini documentary of this guy cooking food out in nature using rocks, giving you a recipe of all the stuff he finds in the area, and then they do this little documentary, and it's great, and they're wonderful and fun, but they're branded content.
Right, and if Yeti mistreats their workers, that's not in the many films. But this goes back to the 1920s, where Henry Ford was the first to do educational films, to Americanize immigrants coming to our country, to their country at the time. And he would put in the logo, in the corner of the screen, would be a Model T radiator with Ford on it. And often as you're shooting street scenes, what should happen? Ford cars keep coming through the shot. So it's product placement in the 1920s. But did I answer your question, or did?
It's sort of the knowing what the intent is and making sure, as you say, that it's labeled.
Yeah, I don't do things that I can't somehow, I think, honestly justify to myself. But I've done. Maybe what I do is for foundations and nonprofits. Those are the kinds of films I've done. And so they're really not commercial films. I've done a film for an adoption agency about, adoption. It promotes the agency, but it's the subject. I deal with the subject in a realistic way. Save the Children documentaries, the same kind of stuff. I did a whole series of films for the Metropolitan Transportation, MTA, here in LA, when they were building the subway. So it was really about city planning, why you should have, train stations that build cities around train stations. And I believed in that. It was promoting mass transit. I had no problem promoting mass transit. So yeah, I was selling something, but it's something I believed in. I believed it was okay.
So, hi, John.
Hi.
So, I had a question.
Tom White is from IDA. He is the editor of the IDA magazine, and I hired him to be the editor of the IDA magazine 25 years ago, right?
No, you actually didn't. But no, so it was a couple of board presidents later after you.
Okay.
Yeah. So my question about Let There Be Light. So if you said that people didn't see it for 20 years, that would place it in the 60s, which, the reporting from Vietnam did show the truth of war. And I'm wondering about the context in which Let There Be Light was shown. Was it one of the networks? Was it shown in theaters? Was there a big build-up to it?
No, it sort of slipped in the side door. It was shown in theaters. The issue was, and it's a constant issue with documentary filmmakers, again, the argument of the military was, these are people under huge stress. I mean, they're physically and mentally, it's a very moving film. And they're being treated in ways that are positive. The point of view is that they're learning to cope with what they went through. But the Army said to Houston, you've made an anti-war film, and you've invaded the privacy of these soldiers. They're going to be seen on theater screens, not able to talk, frightened, crying, all that kind of thing. And Houston's response was if I ever made a pro-war film, take me out and shoot me. And the other thing was, yeah, that's a real issue. But the goal of the film wasn't to make fun of these people and say, look how weird he is, he can't talk, isn't that funny? No, it's to show how the treatment was used in every case. And it's probably true in any case. But it's fascinating. One of the individuals, he stutters, and he can't deal with S sounds. And he can't say S sounds. And they put him under hypnosis, and they realized that what he's responding to was the rush of German incoming artillery. And he was caught in that sound, and he couldn't say S's.
So I think his question also was, so if it came out 20 years later in the 60s, did it come out because of the Vietnam War? Were they deciding?
I'm not sure about that. It certainly was possible. For example, the films about Nagasaki and Hiroshima, I think took it 30 years before they were shown in all their detail. Japanese did it first.
I don't know. I mean, kind of a segue of film. Another film that was censored, which you mentioned before, Ticket Follies, also shows mental illness in its truthful form. And I think was that the reason it was? I mean, it was invading the privacy. It was a presumption, and there was lawsuits, and it would be.
That had to do with the hospital, I think, though, right?
It was a hospital. I think there was the people. I mean, it's very stark. If you see, I mean, you've seen it, I've seen it. It's a
very powerful film. But again, it's always the audience borderline. Like I say, why are you telling me this? Why am I watching this? Why do you want me to watch this? Do you want me to watch this and say, God, look at that crazy guy. He's walking around naked. Wow, look at that. Or do you want to say, these are people who are in a very bad situation in this hospital. And the hospital people wanted the film made because they hoped they would improve conditions. But what happened with Weissman is that the same argument was made. You're invading the privacy of these people. So in some cases, many of the people had died in the film by the time it was shown. Then again, to me, these are fascinating things that you really, as a documentary filmer, you have to be careful to think about all the time. And Weissman is terrific in the sense of how he finds things. And it's, people asked him the secret to his success. He said, hang around and shoot lots of film.
Okay, we're going to take one last question because I want to leave enough time for all the books Jon is going to have to sign.
Oh, yes. Let's stop right now and start signing.
So you talked about curiosity as to why you did it. You talked about the importance of truth. You talked about facing the camera the other way. What are the considerations for, now this is personal because it's not the branding or where they've hired you to create the documentary, but your target audience, who are you speaking to? How do you consider what you're doing in regards to what audience you're trying to talk to, or do you care?
Well, of course you care. I don't target the audience like I'm going for a sci-fi audience, I'm going for a mystery audience, I'm going for a rom-com audience with this documentary. I hope the documentary is as interesting to as many people as possible. I don't break it down by genres. I mean, if it's music like Chicano rock, I would hope that whether you've never heard the music or not, if you're interested in music, but at the same time you're interested in these kids growing up in East LA, and they're trying to find their identity in America. So you don't have to like the music, it's their struggle to find their own identity, so that's interesting. And also in documentaries, again, that's one of the things I don't want to do this. If I've done a story, what happens with a lot of filmmakers, you find success and you do the same story again. You did a successful true crime murder, you get another one, and then you get another one. And I don't want to do, if I've done the true crime murder, I don't want to do it again.
I do think in this day and age, especially, that we do think about who our target audience is, what our market is going to be, like as we're shaping perhaps the treatment, you start to think about those things. But you think about them in terms of, well, what's the title of it? You know, how am I going to hook that audience, right? But then we hope that it goes beyond that audience. So we don't change the story for an audience, but we might change how we sell the story for an audience.
You've got to sell. That's really important.
So I do think people take it into consideration now.
Yeah, I think the idea, though, again, going back, I'm sounding like this old fuddy-duddy. You don't compromise the film you're making to give it a sales hook.
Right.
Hopefully your sales hook is genuinely connected to the film you want to make. And if it's a good film, you know, the hook is great, but it's really, it's describing what you want to do.
Right.
And so you're not saying, oh, well, this guy is an interesting character, I'll make him bigger because people will be more interested in him. Well, if he's not an interesting character, find another hook, because it's not the truth.
I want to thank you both for a really interesting conversation, and the audience as well. Thank you for some great questions. I will say that I knew Jon was going to have some interesting things to say, but I especially want to thank Sonora Bartels for all the preparation. She did this all for the library on her own and her evening, and I appreciate that so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. A great interview. So let me help you down.